Hi everyone, welcome to Exploring with Scientists, How Do Some Frogs Avoid Extinction? Today this is part one, Careers in Science. I'm going to be talking about how I became a scientist, what kind of scientist I am, and what I actually do. This is part one of a four-part series. So what kind of scientist am I? I am a herpetologist, which means I study amphibians and reptiles. So someone can be classified by the kind of organisms they study. So for example, a person who studies plants could be a botanist. A person who studies microbes could be a microbiologist, and so on. So a person who studies amphibians and reptiles is a herpetologist. And these are a few pictured here, right? So we have turtles in the top left and a snake in the bottom right. And so these are examples of reptiles. And then we have two frogs here, which are examples of amphibians. Another amphibian that you might find is a salamander. And so the group of scientists that study these kind of organisms that are they kind of share a lot of characteristics, right? They're very colorful, they have a lot of cool behaviors, they're all cold-blooded, those kind of things kind of all grouped together. And so we call ourselves herpetologists. I'm also a conservation biologist, which means I focus on questions that are targeted towards conserving biodiversity. So biodiversity is just the diversity or variation of life. So for example, right, all the things I talked about with the amphibians and reptiles, their cool behaviors, their colors, how they interact with each other in their environment, the variation in all the things that they do, that's what I'm interested in protecting and conserving. And so the research questions that I'm focused on are targeted towards that. So for example, here in a picture, you can kind of see a road running more or less through the middle of this photo in one of my field sites. As conservation biologists, we're interested, right, in how humans interact with the wild. And so if we have this road here, how does this impact frogs that can cross the road and cross from one environment to another, or turtles, or things like that? And so this is an example of the things that we think about as conservation biologists. What do I study? There are too many questions to answer as a scientist. We have to narrow it down. So the things that I actually do right now, what I'm studying is these group of frogs here, 5 of my target species. I study frogs that are endangered to try to understand why they're in trouble. That's the first part. Endangered means as a population of frogs is just a group of frogs. One of these frogs has a bunch of individuals in an environment. That's a population. When it shrinks down too small, they're kind of in a danger zone of becoming extinct, which means disappearing forever. So endangered means they're in that critical small population state to where they're kind of in trouble. So first we have to understand that, and that's the first part of my research. And then I try to use that information to help them from disappearing. So once we know why they're in trouble, we can hopefully prevent them from being even in more trouble. Where do I do my science? So as a scientist, we kind of have this view of people working in lab coats in the lab and doing really important work. But as a scientist, I didn't find out until I kind of became one, all the things that scientists can do. So I work in the field. So this is a map of some of the projects I've worked on. And this is zoomed in sight of a stream in a tropical forest in Ecuador, which is a country in South America. So I get to go to the field as a scientist, right? I get to spend potentially months at a time in the field looking for frogs that I work on. I get to do this with an amazing team of scientists, pictured here at a place that we're working at in Ecuador. So I get to travel with this team of people, do all this really fun stuff in the field, looking for our target species. I get to take this and bring it to the lab, all of this information, the samples that I collect. And I get to, this is where, I'm wearing a lab coat, we're in the lab in the sterile environment, using chemicals and different things to extract specific information that we want from our samples. I'm doing lab experiments, those kind of things. I translate that information to the computer where I analyze all this data and I make figures and visualize what the trends are that we're trying to figure out, trying to actually answer the questions so that I can write it up and share with other scientists, so that I can share with all of you, and I can talk to different audiences and share my work. And so as a scientist, it's kind of fun to be involved in all these things. And there's a lot of things that you do. So a day in the life of a scientist can be completely different from one week to the next. I became a scientist not actually until college, really, but early on I got interested in animals and wildlife by watching Steve Irwin. So I don't have anyone in my family that's a scientist. I didn't know anyone growing up. So the first introduction of seeing someone who studied animals and someone who taught me about them was on TV. So I'd watch Animal Planet and shows like Steve Irwin and try to kind of mimic that as a natural kid does. And so I would go out and flip logs around my house looking for salamanders and playing in ponds and things like that. So this is how I think I developed a strong passion for animals early on. And it wasn't until college that I actually learned that I could become a scientist. So I was always, from this point, I was interested in animals, but I didn't know what I wanted to study when I went to college. In my first year, I took a class and realized that there are jobs where you can just study whatever you want, and you can actually have that as a job. So ever since then, I've just been I took more classes, I got more involved in research opportunities, had good mentors in college, good professors and teachers, and just slowly started working my way in. And so that's how I became a scientist. So takeaways, anyone can be a scientist. You can have a career here, and if you're interested and passionate about things, you can have that as a job. And there are lots of different ways to become a scientist, and lots of different ways that scientists work in different areas.